Testing 1, 2.
No, you should definitely, because it picks up everything,
Okay.
you know, your
Okay. So just hit it on when I intended.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3. That's good. Okay. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's good. Even if you keep both of them, there is no feedback as I used to see. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. This is the microphone, witness microphone. Testing 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Yeah, it's around that. Okay. Thank you so much. Thanks. Bye.
me.
And welcome to today's subcommittee hearing. Today we'll discuss workplace leave policies, related opportunities and challenges facing employers and working families, and ways in which we can encourage employers to develop or expand successful paid leave options for their employees. This century has a vastly different business landscape than the last. From the advent of the gig economy to the demand for telework and other work-life policies that address employees' needs, business as usual just doesn't work for working families anymore. In response, many employers have implemented and continue to implement innovative paid leave policies. In fact, today's workers are starting to consider these paid leave policies alongside other traditional tangible benefits like pay raises. A 2015 study conducted by Harris Poll and Glassdoor found that nearly 4 in 5 employees would prefer new or additional benefits or perks over a pay increase. Additional studies have validated this employment trend even more in recent years. This year, the HR Policy Association released a study that noted, and I quote, nearly 70% of its members find the millennials expect greater flexibility with regard to scheduling and time off. Innovative paid leave policies are not only an important tool for businesses to attract and retain the best employees, but they also give workers across all business sectors the ability to create a better work-life balance. Time off is increasingly important to employees, whether it's used to go back to school, care for a child or a loved one, or just spend more time with a family. Employers are responding to these changing expectations by offering employees a wider variety of benefits. In addition to providing traditional paid time off and sick leave, an increasing number of companies have added flexible work arrangement options to their employment leave policies. These arrangements may allow employees to take advantage of cutting-edge offerings like flexible hours, telecommuting, compressed work weeks, and job sharing. Importantly, these arrangements are tailored to the needs of employers' workforce. And employers continue to develop and deploy these leave policies, there's been a significant increase in new and oftentimes conflicting state and local paid leave mandates. These growing patchwork of mandates across multiple jurisdictions creates a real administrative and implementation burden, particularly on small businesses, while also increasing compliance costs for employers. For example, currently there are 8 states and over 30 localities with paid leave laws on the books. By contrast, 20 states have bans against local paid leave or paid sick leave laws. As you might imagine, all these states and local laws are far from consistent. The current patchwork of paid leave laws at the state and local level can pose challenges to employers of all sizes trying to navigate them. And the mandatory nature of these laws deprives businesses of freedom to craft individualized policies to best address the needs of their employees. That doesn't help employers, and it doesn't help their workers. Today's hearing should give all of us valuable firsthand insight into the evolving topic of workplace leave policies, and I look forward to the discussion. I now yield to Ranking Member Sablan for his opening remarks.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this hearing to call attention to the problem facing millions of working people who lack access to paid sick leave, paid family and medical leave, and predictable scheduling. Here is the problem. An estimated 37 million workers, many employed in service industries and low-wage jobs, cannot earn a single paid sick day to care for themselves when they get sick or to go to the doctor. Nearly a quarter of adults have lost a job or have been threatened with job loss for taking time off because of personal illness or to care for a family member or family members. In 2016, only 13% of private industry employees had access to paid family leave, through their employers. Lack of paid family leave policy costs workers an estimated $20 billion in lost wages every year. Many working people lack predictable schedules as well. Approximately 41% of hourly workers receive their work schedules only 7 days in advance, making it difficult for workers to make a living and meet their responsibilities at home. Increasing workplace flexibility is clearly a core economic issue. Today, I hope we will explore solutions to improve the economics for workers and employers. There is also good news. Access to earned sick days has increased, up from 61% of private sector workplaces in 2015 to 68%. This favorable trend has been driven in large part by earned sick days legislation recently enacted by 8 states and 32 localities. In 2016, an Obama administration executive order provided over 1 million federal contract workers with up to 7 paid sick days. However, there are no federal laws providing for or requiring employers to provide employees with paid or unpaid sick days. The Healthy Family Act, H.R. 1516, introduced by Representative DeLauro, and which I am a co-sponsor, establishes a worker's right to earn paid sick leave by providing 1 hour of sick leave for every 30 hours worked, up to 56 hours per year. Paid sick days can save employers, taxpayers, and families money while promoting healthier workplaces and communities. Workers without paid sick days are more likely to report going to work with a contagious illness, like the flu, and risk infecting others. Parents without paid sick days are more than twice as likely as parents with paid sick days to send a sick child to school or daycare. The Family and Medical Leave Act of 1993, the FMLA, provides up to 12 weeks of unpaid, job-protected leave for key family caregiving responsibilities, such as the birth and care of a newborn or the care of a family member with a serious health condition. But the vast majority of the private sector workforce doesn't have access to paid family leave. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, only about 15% of workers have access to paid family leave through their employers. The Family Act, H.R. 947, also introduced by Representative DeLauro, and which I also co-sponsor, addresses this problem. It guarantees workers 12 weeks of paid family and medical leave, financed through a social insurance program funded by both employees and employers, who each make a contribution of 0.2% of wages. In return, workers would receive 2/3 of their wages during eligible family leave. And Mr. Chairman, I'm also concerned about 2 legislative proposals that merit careful scrutiny. One proposes a paid sick leave credit of 12 to 25%. This may sound like an attractive inducement, but there is little evidence that this would incentivize employers who do not already have a paid sick plan to create one. In a recent Ernst & Young survey, 35% of small businesses did not see a tax credit as a benefit to inspire them to offer paid leave. We also need to critically and carefully assess the workflex in the 21st Century Act. This bill would allow employers to create a new, qualified, flexible workplace arrangement plan under the Employee Retirement Income and Security Act. That's ERISA. It is concerning that these plans would enable employers to avoid compliance with state and local paid leave, family leave, wage and hour, and predictable scheduling laws. We should not put downward pressure on workplace benefits that already exist or could be enacted. I hope we can have a robust discussion today about creating minimum standards for earned sick days, family and medical leave, and flexible and predictable schedules. I appreciate the witnesses taking their valuable time to discuss these issues with us today, and I look forward to hearing their testimony. Thank you, and I yield back my time, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7C, all members will be permitted to submit written statements to be included in the permanent hearing record, and without objection, the hearing record will remain open for 14 days to allow such statements and other extraneous material referenced during the hearing to be submitted for the official hearing record. And now it's my privilege to introduce the distinguished witnesses who are here, who will provide context to what we're discussing today, and we appreciate you being willing to address our committee this morning. First, Ms. Angela Schaefer is Vice President of Human Resources with Safety National of St. Louis, Missouri, and is testifying on behalf of the Society for Human Resources Management. Welcome. Ms. Barbara Brickmeyer is Vice President of Benefits and HR Development at IBM Corporation and is testifying on behalf of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Welcome. The Honorable Hans Reamer is President of the Montgomery County Council in Rockville, Maryland. Welcome. It's good to have an elected official. Can feel for us. Okay. Ms. Carrie Lucas is President of the Independent Women's Forum here in Washington, D.C. Welcome. I'll now ask our witnesses to raise your right hand and be sworn in. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Let the record reflect the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Before I recognize you to provide your testimony of 5 minutes, let me briefly explain the lighting system. It's a stoplight pattern. Green means go. Yellow means start to wrap it up, you have a minute left, and red means it's time to hit the brakes and finish your sentence or your thought, but you'll have plenty of opportunity, I'm sure, to address the majority of your concerns and ideas by the questions of our committee, who will try to hold to 5 minutes as well for questioning. And of course, your written record is part of our record also. So having said that, let me now recognize Ms. Schaefer for your 5 minutes of testimony.
Good morning, Chairman Wahlberg and Ranking Member Sablon. It's an honor to be with you to discuss opportunities and challenges for employers and employees with respect to workplace leave policies. I serve as the Vice President of Human Resources for Safety National, an insurance carrier headquartered in St. Louis, Missouri, and I appear today on behalf of the Society of Human Resource Management, or SHRM. Mr. Chairman, it goes without saying that we are all incredibly busy these days at home and work. Considering that 42% of employees have child care responsibilities and 31% expect to provide elder care in the next 5 years, it's no surprise that more than 40% of men and women experience work-family conflict. Clearly, employees today are juggling even more responsibilities between home and work, which is why today's discussion on workplace policies to support both employees and employers is so important. Helping our employees meet their work-life needs is a top priority for Safety National. That's why we offer a generous paid time off policy that gives employees maximum flexibility over how to use their paid leave. Additionally, we provide employees with flexible schedules, daily schedule flexibility, and make-up time opportunities, all of which are outlined in my written testimony. In addition to my company, many other employers voluntarily offer generous workplace flexibility options to support their recruitment and retention strategies. These offerings often provide a competitive advantage in the search for talent. One of the challenges that employers, including Safety National, has encountered in offering these benefits is the fragmented set of state and local leave laws that continue to grow. This patchwork of rigid mandates, now at a total of 40, is difficult to navigate both for large multi-state employers, but also for small to mid-sized companies like mine. Because we have employees in San Francisco, for example, which has a sick leave requirement, as does the state of California, we must ensure we are complying with both, even though the laws are overlapping and different. These compliance efforts also come at a cost to my business. For example, we had to switch to an entirely new payroll system to meet the California requirement that PTO be listed on employees' paychecks, and this was at a cost of $76,000. Additionally, we had to set up multiple rules in our payroll system to account for the accrual and rollover rules under the various state and local laws. 2 members of my team spent almost 80 hours implementing just the PTO portion of the new system and identifying technical issues, which is a significant undertaking considering we only have 14 employees in the state. Multiple rules have also meant increased legal fees for my company in trying to implement and comply with these laws. This effort has been particularly time-consuming and difficult as many of these laws conflict with each other, use undefined and ambiguous terms, and require our outside legal counsel to interpret the various leave laws to ensure that our policies are in compliance. Mr. Chairman, to make the new workplace work for employers and today's modern workforce, we can't go by the old rules. Rather than more one-size-fits-all rigid government mandates prescribing how and when leave must be used, SHRM and its members believe that the United States must have a 21st century work flex policy that works for employers and employees alike. That is why SHRM strongly supports H.R. 4219, the Work Flex in the 21st Century Act, because it delivers on this goal. By amending ERISA, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, this bill provides employers the option to offer a new WorkFlex plan that would include both guaranteed paid leave and access to flexible work arrangement to all of its employees, including part-time employees. Under H.R. 4219, employees benefit from paid leave, access to a flexible work option, and strong employee protections that have been provided under ERISA for more than 40 years, while participating employers benefit from being able to follow a federal framework rather than the current patchwork of state and local laws. This legislation would allow Safety National to treat employees consistently across all of our offices and would ease the administrative burden we face within our payroll system. Mr. Chairman, work is more flexible than ever, so workplace rules need to be too. SHRM and its members believe public policy should facilitate greater employer adoption of these valuable workplace flexibility benefits rather than curtail an employer's ability to offer policies that meet employees' needs. In closing, and on behalf of SHRM, we appreciate the committee's focus on this critical issue, and thank you again for this opportunity. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. I recognize Ms. Brickmeyer for your 5 minutes of testimony.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Sablin, and other members of the committee. I'm Barbara Brickmeyer, VP for Human Resources and Business Development with IBM. I'm responsible for overseeing global benefits design and execution across IBM. I'm here today on behalf of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to discuss the challenges facing large, multi-jurisdiction companies that must navigate the maze of increasingly complex, conflicting, and overlapping paid leave mandates across the country. IBM has always supported the provision of paid leave so employees can tend to their personal needs, whether they be health-related or for other reasons. Providing time off to our regular full-time and part-time employees is not only consistent with our policy, but also an important tool to use for the well-being of our employees while attracting the most highly talented professionals. We provide a generous paid leave policy that includes a minimum of 15 paid vacation days, up to 26 weeks of full or partially paid short-term disability, 12 weeks of paid child care bonding leave for new parents, in addition to sick leave. As a 50-state employer, a formidable challenge is the administrative and compliance burden created by myriad inconsistencies in the various state and local leave laws, the speed at which new laws and amendments arise, and the sheer number and range of requirements applicable to IBM's diverse employee base around the country. So let me be very specific. In the area of paid sick leave, by my last count, there were 6 states, 2 counties, and roughly 30 local jurisdictions with paid sick leave laws. In addition, there is a federal executive order establishing paid leave for federal contractors. Nearly all of these apply to IBM. And what frustrates us is that these federal, state, and local paid sick leave laws are all different. They specify different levels of leave and include varying eligibility rules for employees, in addition to defining covered family members in different ways. Implementation requirements such as front-loading, carryover, documentation, notification, and accrual rates may also vary. Furthermore, the laws are amended at different times, obliging us to change our leave offerings, postings, and notifications. I provided several examples of these in my written testimony, and to say the least, they present a complex obstacle course for employers, particularly multi-state employers like IBM, whose populations vary from single digits in some locales to many thousands in others. I can only speculate how companies may be discouraged from voluntarily providing paid sick leave and or paid family leave to their employees because of this confusion. So I'm going to give a terrific example, which again follows on the San Francisco example. So a San Francisco-based IBM working on a federal contract would be covered by up to 4 different paid leave laws for personal illness or that of a covered family member, not to mention the federal FMLA, which covers unpaid leave in similar circumstances. Specifically, an employee could be covered by Executive Order 13706, the California Healthy Workplaces, Healthy Families Act of 2014, the San Francisco Paid Leave Ordinance, and the California Paid Family Leave Law, and they all may apply. Each law varies with respect to one or more factors, such as time off amounts, covered family members, notification, reporting, and record keeping. While the most generous provisions would apply, identifying them and ensuring compliance necessitates significant time and resources and might actually vary with each employee's personal circumstance. Of course, IBM is not alone in this predicament, and we would speculate that given our own challenges and despite our significant resources and fairly sophisticated HR system, it must be far more burdensome and costly for smaller companies with fewer resources, leading to non-compliance or other strategies to avoid the mandates altogether. Given the proliferation of different and complex paid leave mandates at the federal, state, and local levels, IBM strongly supports a federal preemptive legislative solution like that in HR 4219, the WorkFlex in the 21st Century Act. And this is an example of the way employers could opt in to a single national paid leave policy that would satisfy compliance requirements in multiple jurisdictions. Such a simplified approach would greatly reduce costs and mitigate the staggering and growing administrative complexity while allowing us to continue offering and designing generous leave benefits for our employees that would not vary based on where they work. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. Now I recognize the Honorable Hans Riemer for your 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Wahlberg, Ranking Member Sablon, and members of the committee. My name is Hans Riemer, and I'm the president of the Montgomery County Council here in Maryland. Montgomery County is an inclusive metropolitan community that is home to more than 1 million people, all of whom I represent as an at-large council member. I'm here today on behalf of our county council and county executive to speak to you about the importance of local and state workplace laws through the lens of Montgomery County's experience adopting a local paid sick days law. As you know, local elected officials are always on the ground in their communities and know the needs and the values of the people that they represent. I meet my constituents every day. I talk to them at the grocery store and community events. In Montgomery County, we know that working families need real policy solutions to provide paid leave. We listen to the people in our community, and in response, the council adopted an earned sick and safe leave law that guarantees workers can earn up to 7 days of paid time off. In Montgomery County, our law guarantees that employees can use the sick leave they have earned to care for or treat an illness or injury. I can tell you that I have met so many people who have needed to use leave after an injury or sudden illness, such as a car crash or the flu, or taking care of a child who broke an arm. Our law also guarantees employees can use leave to care for an ailing relative or to deal with medical or legal issues related to domestic violence or sexual assault. We all know families where a child has special needs or a parent or grandparent is sick, and their caregivers need a right to take at least some time to care for them. As you can imagine, these are not events that employees can predict or schedule in advance. Without paid sick time, employees are often forced to go to work and spread the flu to their coworkers or customers, or to send their kids to school sick and infect their classmates and teachers. We all pay the price. When the Maryland legislature passed a statewide paid sick leave law last year, we worked with legislators to ensure that our county is free to keep the stronger policy that works for us. We have also been working with our state legislators to find a way to adopt a longer-term paid family and medical leave program. There is no one-size-fits-all solution to workplace leave policies, but there is a baseline protection that every worker in America deserves. Congress should adopt common sense policies like the Healthy Families Act, the Family Act, and the Schedules at Work Act that set a standard while allowing states and local governments to determine what additional protections make sense for them. We strongly oppose H.R. 4219, which would undermine our paid sick days law and turn back the clock for more than 13 million working people who have gained access to paid sick days through laws passed in 8 states and 32 local jurisdictions. H.R. 4219 does not provide paid sick days, it takes them away. H.R. 4219 takes away important rights to sick leave that local and state governments have granted to their residents, rights that were granted using sovereignty that belongs to us. The federal law would create an off-ramp for employers to evade state and local laws presently covering millions of people. The law goes against the basic tenet that if a decision can be made closer to the people without violating important principles, then that is where the decision-making power should fall. By creating an escape hatch from state and local law, H.R. 4219 eviscerates the hard-won right to earn paid sick time that my constituents have and puts decision-making back in the hands of their employers, who could unilaterally deny their urgent leave requests. Many states have health, safety, and environmental requirements that may differ from federal law. Businesses that are large enough to operate in multiple jurisdictions have advanced systems to address these differences. Instead of working to undermine state and local law, let's work together to improve people's lives through a national minimum paid sick days standard and a national paid family and medical leave plan. State and local governments have long been the laboratories of democracy, helping forge workable national standards. Congress should safeguard, not undermine, our ability to do what we think is right for our constituents. H.R. 4219 will create confusion in the workforce, overburden and undermine local and state governments, and jeopardize the family life and public safety of millions of people. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Ms. Lucas, we recognize you for your 5 minutes.
Chairman Wahlberg and Ranking Member Sablon, thank you for the opportunity to be here this morning and talk about this important issue. I'm representing the Independent Women's Forum, a nonprofit dedicated to developing and advancing policies that enhance people's freedom, choices, and opportunities. IWF employs nearly 20 workers, almost all of whom are women. And as the person responsible for overseeing the budget, I know firsthand the impact that leave benefits have on a small business or an organization like ours. Like most employers, IWF works hard to support our employees who need time off for personal reasons, like the birth of a child or another family issue. We also try to be fair to those employees who don't need time for extended leave. I'm also the mother of 5 children, so I appreciate the importance of being able to take time off from work firsthand. But I encourage you, as you consider potential reform and action in regards to paid leave, I'd encourage you to keep the following in mind. Our workplaces and our workforce are increasingly diverse. Growing numbers of workers are participating in the gig economy, which means that they are working for themselves as a contractor rather than for a traditional employer. A growing number of workers are also telecommuting. Families are changing too, as more women become sole or primary breadwinners, and more people are remaining childless. These trends should caution us against creating a one-size-fits-all leave policy that ignores that a worker without children working in a traditional business is likely to have very different preferences for leave benefits than a self-employed single parent. We also need to consider that businesses able to offer telecommuting options can provide different leave benefits than a restaurant or hospital that needs sufficient in-person staff. Ignoring these differences and creating a mandate or a government entitlement program will impose real costs on workers in the form of reduced workplace flexibility, less hiring, and in particular, less opportunities for women of childbearing age. This isn't just a theoretical risk. I got to live in Europe for 7 years, and while these countries offer extensive paid leave benefits for families with children, women pay a considerable price in terms of workplace opportunities. The National Bureau of Economic Research found that EU countries have boosted their female labor force participation rate, but that women there mostly work in part-time and in lower paid positions. While 14% of American female workers are managers compared to 15% of American men, just 5.9% of European female workers are managers compared to 22% of European men. So clearly there is a disconnect there. Now, advocates for sweeping government action often paint a very grim picture of working in the United States, claiming that 12% of workers, something like that, have only that share has paid leave benefits. But fortunately, that's an inaccurate picture of how businesses here function. Just because employers seldom offer specific family leave benefits doesn't mean that workers generally don't have access to paid time off for family needs. The Census Bureau studied women having their first child and found that 56% of full-time working mothers used paid leave following the birth of that child. 42% used unpaid leave, 10% had disability leave, and this all adds up to more than 100% since some use more than one bucket of leave. Now, these numbers suggest that there certainly are many workers who would appreciate more time off and could use more paid leave benefits, but it also tells us that most businesses and employers do voluntarily offer leave, and which is a reason to avoid upending the employment contracts of all 160 million working Americans, many of whom are happy with their current compensation arrangements. I would encourage that policymakers' goals should be to help make it easier for workers to prepare for time away from work and for businesses to provide leave benefits, but without discouraging hiring and innovative work relationships. For example, the government could consider creating savings account systems, much like a 401k or an ESA, that would enable workers to save tax-free for time off from work. Employers and charities could also contribute to these accounts, and the government could consider augmenting saving to encourage participation, and particularly to help those with lower incomes. However, I think it's important to keep in mind that the best way to ensure that workers have the benefits they need is for there to be a growing economy with plentiful job opportunities and rising compensation so that they can find positions that make the most sense for themselves. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
I think there's been a change in the chair, you might have noticed. Mr. Wahlberg had to go and vote. He had a markup. So at this time, I'd like to recognize the chairman of the full committee, Dr. Fox, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Rowe. And I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today. This is an important issue that I think will get increasing attention across our country. Ms. Schaefer, employers have many reasons for offering various types of benefits packages, including health, retirement, paid leave to employees. Would you briefly explain why employers offer paid leave policies to their employees and how this practice aids in attracting and retaining the best workers?
Thank you for your question. Yes, it's important overall to employee engagement, just the fundamental employee engagement. leads to reduced absenteeism and tardiness. It reduces turnover. It increases our ability to recruit and retain, as you mentioned. For example, I recently hired someone in my department, and one of the reasons she came to us was because of our flexible work policies. And for the employees, it's important that they be able to make the decisions about how they are taking their time off.
Thank you. Ms. Lucas, when confronted with government mandates, how do employers typically respond? And how do small businesses compensate for the additional costs of complying with mandates? What impact do these mandates have on job creation?
Well, certainly, I think we all know the kind of the basic economic lesson that when costs go up, you're able to buy less of something. And that's what happens when you increase mandates and increase the cost of employing someone, increase the risks associated with employing someone. Employers are more likely to look for ways to hire fewer workers and then to pay workers less. We've seen over the recent decades that the cost of compensation largely has, one of the reasons why they've stalled or our wages have stalled is because there's so much of our compensation is now in the form of benefits. So another mandate would increase that trend or further that trend.
Thank you very much. Ms. Brickmeyer, historically, much of the paid leave discussion has focused on women. Why is this paid leave issue not just a women's issue?
Well, I don't believe it is just a women's issue. Men need to take off time as well. The nature of the family is defined very differently for different individuals, something that IBM holds very dear, that people have personal lives, which is defined by them, and we need to respect and encourage them to pursue those personal goals and obligations, because that makes them a more healthy and productive employee. I can give you an example. We recently increased our child bonding leave for all new parents, and our male and our female employees, as well as adoptive parents, now get 12 weeks off with pay, and we find that more and more of our new dads are taking that time off because they realize that child rearing, having responsibility for their families, is as important to them as it is to their wives or their partners.
Thank you very much. It certainly sounds as though IBM has a very generous paid leave program. It would be a great place to work. As you mentioned, in September 2015, President Obama issued an executive order requiring federal contractors to provide their employees up to 7 days of paid sick leave per year. How has this requirement in particular affected IBM's paid leave program? Do you have an idea, you alluded to it before, but do you have an idea how much time IBM spent to ensure it was in compliance with this particular requirement? And even though IBM was already offering more than required under the executive order, could you talk a little bit about the cost of reporting that occurred as a result of the mandate?
Certainly. So we decided to apply the mandate to 100% of our employees because the way that it is written, it's very difficult to distinguish who's covered, because I think the threshold is 20% or something of your time. It's very hard for us to determine who those are. So we're applying it to 100% of our population. We literally spent about 9 months of my time, my team's time, inside counsel, outside counsels, and our HR systems in making those modifications for tracking, because we didn't have a sufficient tracking system, and communicating it to employees. And again, the confusion about what they do, how they track it, why do they have to track it. It can go into actual hours of tracking, which our employees are not used to because the majority of our employees are professional. They don't track their time down to the hour, nor do they expect to have to track it. So that's somewhat of a burden to them as well as to their managers.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlelady, for yielding. The ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Scott, you recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Reamer, are you aware of any whether or not the tax credit in the bill is sufficient to entice businesses to actually provide this kind of leave if they're not doing it already? Have you seen any around the country, any program where that would be sufficient?
Thank you, Congressman. Again, it's really an honor to be here. You know, the incentive for employers, in my view, in the HR 4219 is to get out of state and local requirements that establish rights for their employees to provide leave. And if you are, you know, an employer that wants to provide leave, then, and not every employer is necessarily a high-road employer, but if you are an employer that does, then, you know, you would not have a challenge. You would not be typically required to provide more leave according to these state and local laws. You may have to adjust your business processes. But in my view, the real incentive is to opt out of state and local law. I don't know that the tax provision will necessarily provide much additional encouragement.
Okay. On your bill and your local bill, have you had complaints about the legislation?
It's been operating now for almost a year, and we believe it's a success. You know, we worked very closely with our employers, and we heard from many employers like IBM, as not IBM itself, but employers that offered real leave packages. And we made sure that our law would not, you know, cause an employer to want to diminish its benefits. And if they offer better benefits, then they are really, you know, our law wouldn't be a conflict. So,
have any businesses moved out of the county because of this law?
We are continuing to attract new employers. Our economy is strong. Our unemployment is at an historic low. New companies are moving out of other jurisdictions and locating in Montgomery County.
And if there were a federal exemption, what would happen to your law?
Our law would be essentially, you know, hollowed out. You know, any employer could just simply evade the requirements of our law, which are really just a baseline. You know, our law is not a very generous policy. It's just a baseline policy of 7 paid sick days for the employee. And any employer could just simply avoid it by opting into this provision.
Thank you. Ms. Schaefer, if there's no local or state law in a particular area, does this bill require a business to do anything?
Thank you for your question. So to make sure I understand the question, if there's not currently a leave law, does HR 4219 require the employer to do something?
Right.
Okay. It's voluntary, and so if the employer opts in...
The answer is no, it does not require the business to do anything.
No.
Okay. Now, if there is a local law, and say, as I understand it, you have to have for up to 50 to 249 employees, you have to have 15 days off, but that would include paid holidays. So if you have 9 vacation days and 6 holidays, do I understand this, that you would not have to require any sick leave at all?
I don't have the answer to those specifics.
It appears that if there is no state law, you don't have to do anything. If there is a state law, you can have worse benefits and exempt yourself from the better benefits on the local law. Is there any employee under 4219 who would actually be better off?
They would not receive less than what they are already receiving.
Excuse me?
The employees would not receive less than the leave.
No, that's the whole point of exemption. If you have a plan and the local law requires more generous benefits, you would be exempted from the local law and you would be able to get away with worse benefits. That's what the exemption means. Is that right?
That's not my understanding.
Hans, can you talk about what exemption means?
Thank you. Well, the Montgomery County law establishes a right. So you might accrue a certain benefit, but you have a right to use that benefit under certain circumstances, like your illness, the illness of a family member.
But if it's exempted
federal
by the
doesn't
federal
have
law, all you'd have to do would be to comply with the federal law. You wouldn't have to comply with the more generous benefits. That's the whole point of the exemption.
That's right. The employee does not have a right to use that benefit.
Because it got exempted. Mr. Chairman, I'd ask unanimous consent that a letter from the American Sustainable Business Council in opposition to H.R. 4219 be entered into the record.
Hearing no objection, it'll be entered.
Thank you. Time's up.
I thank the gentleman. His time has expired. I apologize for having to leave occasionally here to vote in Energy and Commerce, but I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. We've heard a great deal about the piecemeal state and local paid leave mandates that, while well-meaning, affect these laws on America's businesses in a somewhat negative way. I'd like to make one point about this. It's certainly not the human resources professionals that are not capable of keeping up with all of these mandates. You're entirely capable of keeping up with these mandates. The point is that you should not have to navigate this patchwork of mandates because they're counterproductive. And to that point, Ms. Schaefer and Ms. Brickmeyer, would your company's commendable paid leave policies look different if they didn't need to be structured in such a way to ensure compliance with the multitude of mandates? And I guess I'd add, would they be more or less generous?
To start. So I think the answer to that is it depends on what the individual state mandates are. And our intent would always be to design a paid leave policy covering a lot of different employee situations that meets the needs of our employees by listening to our employees and doing something that's consistent across the country. So if you're an IBMer in New York, you're an IBMer in California, Texas, Minnesota, Oklahoma, you're all entitled to the same thing. And our workforce is mobile, so it's also important for them to have the same thing regardless of where they work. So our policy is generous, and I would agree that in some cases it would go beyond the mandates, and we would continue to do that. In other cases, it might be below, and we might need to particularly tweak it for that locale, but I'm not sure if we would have the most generous provision apply to all of our employees. And I think the most difficult part of this is the compliance. So not really the intent of the policies, which are admirable, it's the compliance, and it's really getting down to the recording, the notification, the constant change, and the confusion that this causes.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Schaefer?
Most of our employees, 456 of them most of our employees are based in St. Louis, Missouri, where there aren't any of these extra leave laws. And so I would not expect that we would reduce our benefits right now. We're just trying to make sure that we're in compliance with the other state and local laws.
So compliance is the issue, just trying to keep up, make sure that you don't run amok at some point in time.
Exactly.
Unintentionally, but
correct.
Nonetheless. Okay. Listening to your testimonies, it's clear that you all have a lot of information and know what will work, and not just for your companies, but your employees. It's been suggested that local officials are better suited to establish paid leave, sick leave requirements because they live and work next door to the people. However, rather than working next door, so to speak, there's a key entity that works directly with the people who are impacted, and that's employers who are closer and better able to listen and respond to the needs of their employees when it comes to paid leave. They can provide the innovation and flexibility that the government, even a local government, cannot. Ms. Schaefer and Ms. Brickmeyer, why are you, as HR professionals, better attuned to the paid leave request of your employees than the local, state, or even federal government?
I'll start.
Ms. Schaefer.
Thank you for the question. We are listening to our employees. Our employees are explaining to us what they need in their leave policies. We do regular employee engagement surveys where there are two questions. One asks what the company is doing well, the other is what we can improve on. And those are narrative responses, and we get a lot of great feedback there. And then over the last 3 years, we've done regular touch-based surveys with our employees so they can give us this specific feedback. An example is when we implemented our makeup time policy, we were hearing that there were some hiccups, things weren't going as smoothly as we intended, and so we reached back out to our managers and supervisors and the employees to find out what it was that was causing issues, and then we were able to act on that and make changes.
Thank you. Briefly, Ms. Brickmeyer.
Yeah, so very similar to what Ms. Schaefer has said. We listen to our employees, we react. We've been quite generous, as I've indicated. It's also important to know that our employees live in every state, and so it's important for us to understand what's going on in that state, what's prevalent, and also in our industry, it's highly competitive. Our talent base is highly competitive, and we want to make sure that we offer them what they intend to use, what they need. And in devising new types of leaves, for example, now we are looking at something that's more specific to family illness leave, in addition to our parental bonding leave. And it's been very confusing because we can listen to what our employees want, but then we have to think about these 30 other ordinances that might conflict with that.
What that means. Okay. Thank you. My time has expired. I now recognize my friend, the ranking member, Mr. Sablan.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Well, let me start, Council Member Rayburn. Well, first, let me congratulate you on becoming president of the Montgomery County, Maryland Council yesterday. Congratulations, and thank you very much for joining and us and testifying today. Can you tell us the importance of having a federal standard?
Yeah, thank you.
Please.
Well, first of all, I think that many state and local governments are compelled to act because there is no federal standard for sick leave. If Congress were to create a right for employees to have 7 days of paid sick leave that could be used at the right of the employee for care of themselves or their family member, then you may not have a need for state and local governments to act where Congress is not acting. The challenge is the legislation that we are discussing does not establish that right to sick leave. But if Congress were to create a federal strong sick leave policy and a federal family leave policy and so on, you would have fewer state and local governments feeling the need to enhance upon that federal protection.
And this is for both an employee. It doesn't matter on the gender.
Correct.
Thank you. In your testimony, you stated that after passage of legislation, you continue to see economic growth in your county, and Ranking Member Scott has alluded to this earlier, but can you tell us more about that growth?
Yes. Well, Montgomery County is has a very strong economy. We're fortunate to have many large companies and many small companies. And since we have passed sick leave legislation, we've been delighted to see Marriott, a global headquartered company, move into Bethesda downtown when they could have moved to Virginia or Washington. We've seen companies moving out of Washington. We've seen into Montgomery County. So we have a very strong environment. Our unemployment rate is, in the low single digits. So this has not caused any restriction of our economic growth, and to the contrary, we're seeing tremendous progress in Montgomery County.
Yeah, and I ask you for that, and I'll ask you another question because earlier Ms. Lucas testified, calling the this as if any effort to provide some kind of federal standard, calling it actually in her testimony, and I quote, government entitlement program. When actually one of the proposals is to be funded responsibly by small employee and employer payroll contributions of 2 cents per $10 in wages, or less than $1.50 per week for a typical worker. So it is not an entitlement program. It is where the employee and the employer should contribute to. Walk us through the impacts of what would happen in Montgomery County if a federal bill were to pass preempting your paid sick days leave laws.
Thank you. Well, I believe that if this HR 4219 were to pass, that any employer that really wanted to offer a less generous benefit package, provided it still met the minimal standard of the law, which is vague as far as what the worker is entitled to, in my view, would be able to opt in to the federal standard and opt out of the state and of the local standard. And so when I look at the federal legislation, there is no clear right that the employee has to take leave. They must get employer approval, and that may or may not be granted. So I think it would be a strong incentive for employers to opt out of our stronger law, and the residents of our community would essentially lose the right that we had granted to them through our democratic process.
And because I've looked all over, and I may ask you if you've ever seen a proposal in any state, local, county, federal, and the federal governments here, and where you know, comparing what is being discussed today or at any time, the experiences of paid leave, and comparing what we're discussing today with Europe and saying, like, you know, where in France you get 156 weeks, 26 paid for the first child. In Germany, 156 weeks, 52 paid for either parent. Finland, 158 working days for either parent. You can't compare that and says that that's the reason women of childbearing age are a lower number of you know, just one brush stroke, a lower number of management. I don't have very, I think I'm out of time. Mr. Chairman, thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and I recognize Dr. Rowe for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, Mr. Member, thank you. I think the best government's local government. That's the way I started as a city commissioner and local mayor. Dealt with these things. Also was in small business. So there are very different needs of a large multi-state business than there are small businesses and individual localities. I completely see that. And I guess, Ms. Lucas, I want to start with you. Do you believe that these paid leave mandates discourage job creation, and how so if they do?
Well, certainly anything that raises the cost of employing a worker will discourage someone from hiring another worker. And I am concerned, especially as I'm sure this committee has been focused on the future of work and how we're moving increasingly towards looking for automation. A lot of jobs are going to be able to be displaced, to take that human element out of it entirely. And I do think that's a reason to pause and to want to make sure that before we encourage more outsourcing or try to push people outside of a normal employee-employer relationship, if it isn't worth giving people more freedom and flexibility.
You made, Ms. Lucas, you wrote an article in the Washington Post comparing mandated paid leave in Europe to the United States. You wrote about hiring a pregnant woman, very near and dear to my heart. I'm an obstetrician. Prior to her due date. And would you please share the story with the committee and explain why this would not be possible under a federally mandated paid leave system?
Well, you know, it's interesting. In my opening remarks, I mentioned that I employ 20 women right now, and 3 of them are pregnant. So this is an issue that at IWF comes up quite a lot. We tend to have a lot of babies, and one reason that we have, I've been very comfortable hiring people who are pregnant or are likely to become pregnant, is we have paid leave. We don't have nearly as generous, we're a small organization with a small budget, so we don't have nearly as generous policies as the big companies here. But we also have a conversation with this understanding that, yes, some workers are going to take time off for a couple of weeks after following the birth of a child, but then I hope that we kind of work out that they can be available on the phone or to answer quick questions. And there's this back and forth where we try to provide a lot of support and flexibility flexibility, but then our employees are also very willing to provide support and to make those efforts to support us. And I do worry that when we move towards something where there's a certain regulation, you get this many days off, you're not allowed to talk to an employee during those times, that it moves towards, you're cutting off conversations between two humans, two individuals, many of whom sympathize with each other. So that's my concern. And I do think Europe is an extreme example, but when we inch in that direction, certainly people, it has implications for women in particular.
Ms. Brickmeyer, sometimes the burdens of the legislation will impose on businesses are not fully understood. Obviously, when they're played out, they do show themselves. This, in turn, leads up to hurting workers. Can you give more detail about what burdens the emerging state and local paid leave mandates impose on businesses and their workers? For example, what are the costs of a law like California's, both in the short and the long term?
So I think the cost to the employee is really not understanding what they might be entitled to or what their options are. It's very difficult to communicate with employees, particularly about HR matters. They don't often read what we give them what we give them to read. We post things, they don't read those. And so it becomes very difficult for any one individual to determine what it is that they're eligible for and how to plan their life around it. As it's very difficult for us and our HR team to understand that, because in the example of San Francisco, it may vary based on the employee circumstance, because the different covered family members, for example, for which you could take paid time off to help them with an illness, might vary. So that's a difficulty from the employee standpoint. I also think the tracking that's required, we needed to modify our systems that detracted money and time that we might have spent on other things that could aid our business and our employees. I'd much rather be spending time designing and executing on benefit programs and paid leave that can enhance our employee engagement than on compliance on things that I'm not sure add a great deal of value. So, okay.
May not have time to answer it. What would it matter if you just had days off? You didn't have to have a cold one day, or someday you needed to do something in your life, and you have to say, well, I'm sick that day, when you're really not. Why not a vacation day if you want to just take a day off? And hold that thought, because my time is out. Mr. Espeon, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. My question goes to Councilmember Rayburn. Setting a national standard for workplace leave policy like you have in Montgomery County and in New York State seems like a good idea to many, but none of the Republican plans that are out there seem to have this as their goal. Specifically, I would like to ask you two things, Mr. Rayburn. As I mentioned, New York has a strong sick leave policy on the books that are making an incredible positive impact for families and the economy, I think. As someone who is on the ground working on this issue, can you talk about the rights that Montgomery County sick leave law provides to workers, and what can they use leave for? And do you provide any rights that this particular legislation, H.R. 42, the Work Flex bill, will deny to your constituencies?
Thank you, Congressman. Really appreciate the question. Montgomery County's law grants workers the right in Montgomery County to use the leave that they accrue to care for or treat their own illness or illness of a family member, to use that time as well if they have an incident of domestic violence or sexual assault where they need to take time off. That is a right that they have. It's at their discretion. Now, if it's an extended illness, they may need medical certification, but it's at their discretion. As I read H.R. 4219, what I see is that it's more of a loophole for the employer than a right for the employee, and the employer really can refuse the request for leave if that employer determines that they would like to do that. And of course, the employer can deduct from that total leave allowed for holidays and other things like that. So the worker could easily end up really with very little paid sick days without even the right to claim it when they really need it.
My other questions are, why will providing a tax credit to businesses, such as proposed by HR 3595, be ineffective in creating or encouraging businesses to create new workplace leave policies?
Thank you, Congressman. You know, first of all, I'm pleased that we're talking about leave as a good business policy, right? It's nice to hear companies talking about why they must offer strong leave programs in order to compete for the best workers. Communities have the same need as well. States, local governments want to have benefit policies to strengthen their workforce. My feeling is that the tax incentive is sort of a touch of a feather as far as the incentive that it creates for a company that is in real need of attracting a strong workforce. The company has its own economic imperative to offer leave in order to attract great workers. The tax benefit is just kind of icing on the cake. I don't know that it will compel additional companies to offer leave programs.
And currently, hourly minimum wage for tip workers is $2.13 per hour. How can we make sure tipped workers receive benefits closer to their actual wages?
Well, that's a great question. Certainly allowing tip workers to accrue leave based on hours worked rather than the wages paid, as the sick leave law, would do, is important. We've grappled with the rights of tip workers around minimum wage policy. That's an important reason why you want to allow states and local governments to set their own law.
And finally, how will creating a national standard for workplace leave policy help businesses who operate in your county? You said that you have small businesses there, large businesses, the economy there is pretty strong, and others organize their benefits they provide for their employees. How will it help create a workplace leave policy that will help businesses? What has been your experience in the county?
We've heard from many employers who said to us, we want to provide these benefits for our workers. We're a restaurant, we're a cafe, we're a small business. We want to provide these. Unfortunately, we're competing with employers who do not want to provide them. And so we're carrying a cost that they don't have to carry. And that is not a level playing field. So a federal standard will protect businesses that want to do the right thing from low-road employers. I think that is a real benefit. It will also just establish the rules of the road, and then business processes will adjust. Software companies, payroll companies will make changes to their system so no particular employer is going to have to pay for it in the first place.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rayburn.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding. Mr. Allen, you recognize for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for having this important hearing. As far as, I guess my first question would go to Ms. Lucas. Obviously, well, you take healthcare, for example. Healthcare was created during World War II, and because there was tremendous competition for employees, and companies needed a way to attract those employees, so they gave them healthcare benefits. Now the government mandates health care, and it is a royal mess. In my experience in the business world, when hiring people, they want to look at workplace flexibility, they want to look at paid leave, they want to look at all these things. And if a company is going to compete for those employees, obviously, they want to offer the right kind of package with the right kind of compensation to attract that employee to come to work for them. That's the way it should work. With the government mandating benefits, what is that going to do as far as trying to attract the best, brightest employees out there? I mean, it kind of takes one equation out, does it not?
Well, absolutely, and I do think that this idea that there is a minimum standard that everyone must have, that rather than having an extra $10 in your paycheck, that you'd rather have an extra hour of leave is really us making a decision for free people that I don't think is we need to make. I think that there are people who would prefer to have benefits and have leave time, and that's why a growing number of companies are voluntarily offering different leave packages and additional flexibility. But moving to that one-size-fits-all standard is going to erode wages, take-home pay, and really take away freedom and flexibility from workers.
Ms. Brickmeyer, this one-size-fits-all, could you address that in order to, in your competition for the top, the brightest talent out there? I mean, obviously, you're looking at those types of things that would attract that kind of talent. What are some things that you're doing?
Exactly, and that is the issue with mandates, is they forget that one size does not fit all. Well, we like to have national policies, and we do, for our employees so that they know, regardless of where they work, they'll be entitled to the same types of protections and enjoy the same types of programs and benefits that we provide to everyone. They won't have to consider taking a new opportunity for advancement by moving across the country or even across a state or jurisdictional line because their benefits or their leave programs might be different. So being able to assess the needs of our workforce, which are primarily professional, exempt employees. We give a lot of flexibility and recognition of the fact that they are professional, they do work when needed, and they can take time off when needed. So we've designed an approach that really meets our workforce needs. We listen to our workforce, we respond as appropriately, and you can see in my testimony that we're always changing our programs and, in fact, mostly adding to them. And we also have to keep in mind what's happening in our business in the technology space. For example, for our maternity and paid leave for women, we want to give families the time off that they need, but we also want them to come back to work.
Right.
And that's a strong motivator for us to design programs that accomplish those two goals.
Right. Well, you know, as a member of Congress, I had no idea so many people had so many problems with the federal government. Our office spends enormous amounts of time dealing with all these mandates out there, and frankly, the people are sick of them. In fact, they would like more flexibility to work out these agreements with their employers and to provide the kind of freedom and flexibility they need versus some government-mandated policy. To give you an example, I had someone that needed to donate a kidney to his sister. He was an hourly employee, and he had to be out for 6 weeks, and he got 6 weeks of paid leave. And that decision was made by our executive group. So, you know, we have that kind of flexibility in the workplace. I believe that, that obviously, you know, we need to address this and we need to come up with a solution because there are bad actors out there, no question about it. But I think the workplace will take care of that. My time is up and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Ms. Fudge, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all so much for being here today. I think we all realize that we live in a time where corporate profits and income inequality are higher than they have ever been. We are about to pass a tax bill that's going to continue to make the rich richer and the poor poorer. Council President, let me just ask this question to you. As you were talking with people about your earned sick and safe leave law, was there anyone, let me ask this one. How many people ask you to reduce their pay so they could have a day off?
I don't recall anyone saying that.
Not one?
No.
Okay. Were they really looking for something that would allow them to live decent, to have a decent wage, and to be able to take care of their families?
We heard from so many of our community members who experience injury, whose children have special needs, who have an aging parent, and they need to take some time off, and they need the right to do that, and that's what we established for them.
Thank you so much. Ms. Schaefer, let me just, I want to be clear. Is it your argument that workers should make a choice between pay and the ability to take a sick day?
No, it is not.
So what is it that you were saying?
We are offering employees the flexibility, and HR 4219...
But that flexibility depends upon whether they get paid for a day off. Explain to me.
No, it's compensable leave. And so the employee is able to decide when they take the time.
So the employer cannot say to them, no, you can't take this day because I need you to do this.
No, and that is current
You're saying
right
no?
now. Right now, employers and employees have the discussion.
So the answer is yes, not no.
Can you repeat your question?
You said no when I asked you that, and then you're saying, so you're saying it is?
Can you repeat your question, please?
I got your answer. Thank you very much. Council President, what can Congress do to help you and other states and municipalities make the work situation better?
Thank you for that question. Again, I'll say I think a strong federal policy establishing a real right for workers to paid sick days, to family leave, a Social Security type program so that workers can have access to a benefit in the event of the birth of a child in the family or an extended illness. That would be enormously helpful for local communities and state communities all across the country. And then those local communities that feel that they need to enhance upon that, to build upon that strong federal floor, may yet seek to do so. But establishing the basic protection would be the appropriate role for Congress.
You know, it's interesting to me. I understand clearly that there are different standards in different industries or in different sectors. But what I have found is that the people who are hurt the most by not having paid sick leave are the poorest people. Most people who work in industries that are well paid either have it or can afford it. It is only those who cannot afford it that we are punishing by this. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, gentlelady, for yielding. Mr. Akita, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman. I thank the witnesses for their testimony this morning. Ms. Schaefer, I'd like to pick up with you in the discussion we're having. How many state and local paid leave mandates must Safety National continue to monitor and comply with?
Counting, it is at least 5.
At least 5. Are there different mandates for paid sick leave versus paid family leave?
Yes.
Can you walk through a few of those differences?
Well, there's one getting ready to be enacted in January, actually, in New York. So, for example, we're working through that with our legal counsel to really understand what our obligations are there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any others, or what are some of the differences between paid family sick leave and paid sick leave and paid family leave?
So the sick leave would be specific to certain situations for the employee, and then paid family leave, it would go to, it'd be extended to other individuals within the family.
But what's the difference in the mandates? I mean, how wide does it swing from the?
In HR 4219?
The different mandates for paid sick leave versus paid family leave across the country.
I would have to have Sharm respond to you for that.
Yeah, okay, appreciate it. I'll get in some more detail about how complicated this is really going to be, or what your current situation is. Ms. Brickmeyer, thank you. I know companies like IBM who are operating in multiple jurisdictions face significant challenges in complying with all the different state and local paid leave laws. So same kind of question, but one response I've heard to that problem is that the company can simply comply with the most stringent one, the most stringent mandate, and therefore be covered. You kind of touched on this in your testimony, but go into more detail about why you think this isn't the best idea.
Well, I think I was referencing perhaps to San Francisco,
Yeah.
where most of the laws, although I can't speak with specificity, would say that if there's multiple laws that apply or mandates apply, the most generous might apply to an employee. And my point there was that because these mandates have so many different layers of responsibilities and obligations, even down to the number of days and what family members might be covered. A sibling might be covered in California, but not in some other state, for example, a grandparent, and maybe not. You'd actually have to look at the employee's personal situation. which to me is a little bit intrusive to ask about those details. In many cases, the employer has no right to ask those questions. But you might have to in order to determine what would apply for that individual. The other thing I mentioned, which was the executive federal order, that we decided to apply it to all United States because we could not in any one day distinguish who was working on a federal contract.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Lucas, going to you now. As a committee, we have focused, Mr. Chairman, our efforts on the need to bring many antiquated labor laws like Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, and the National Labor Relations Act, NLRA, and other laws into the 21st century. How can Congress empower and encourage employers to continue offering these generous policies without mandating policies? Is there,
Sure.
am I asking for the moon, or is?
No, I mean, I think there's ways that we've discussed, or the Independent Women's Forum has written about tax, ways that you could use the tax code to encourage additional savings programs to help people who don't have leave laws. But also, I think you're onto something in trying to focus on moving beyond the Fair Labor Standards Act, which has a pretty antiquated definition of worker and employee, which is becoming really out of touch as we move towards this world where so many people are telecommuters and gig employees, and we no longer have this, 9 to 5 working in a factory or an office space with one boss. So I think that kind of taking a fresh look at those laws could be useful. And if I can just say one quick thing, and there's been some discussion about this, the real importance of what we're talking about here is really where I think many people are concerned about people with low income, and we're talking about I think that's really when you look at who's lacking paid leave benefits, I think that's who everybody recognizes that is a problem. But I would just caution that I think that when I think about the problems created by paid leave laws and mandates, that's who I'm worrying about. It's because I do think that it's the person we don't see. You get to see somebody who's an employee who's getting the benefit. You don't see the person who's then going to be priced out of a job. And that's a real problem and a real possibility, particularly for those with lower incomes. And anybody who's looked at a budget before knows that there is a trade-off in benefits. When somebody goes away for 6 weeks from maternity leave, a small organization like mine, I can't just wipe my hands and keep paying them. I've got to pay somebody else. That's money I have to come up with.
Thank you. I can see my time's expired, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding. Ms. Blunt-Rochester, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, and I'd like to thank the panel for this discussion. I had the opportunity to serve as State Personnel Director in the state of Delaware. I'm a former SHRM member, lived in China, was a SHRM member there as well. And so I understand the complexities of trying to balance recruitment, retention, productivity of your employees with the cost of your ERP and trying to maintain that. And so I understand that. And I guess one of the first questions I have is really trying to get from your perspective, Ms. Schaefer and Ms. Brickmeyer. We talked about one size fits all, but I guess my question is, to have a national standard to me doesn't mean one size fits all. It means you've got a baseline, and then as an employer, depending on where I live in the country or where what my budget is, that I can give more benefits than that. So can you just confirm for me, because that's my understanding, that by us having a standard, that doesn't mean we necessarily have to have one size fits all. Would you say that's correct?
So the HR 4219 bill doesn't discriminate employers based on industry. Rather, we are identifying them based on size. So that's.
But do you understand my question? If we have a standard across the country in terms of similar to what has been done in Montgomery County, that doesn't mean that as an employer I can't give more.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question is really, I noted, Ms. Lucas, that you said in your testimony that 99% of businesses with more than 50 workers offer some form of paid time off to employees, end quote, and that's from SHRM's own Families and Work Institute's 2016 National Study of Employers. I couldn't find that number, but I found some other interesting ones. Only 39% of employers with 50 or more employees give employees at least 5 days to care for a mildly ill child. Only 58% of women receive some pay during maternity leave. 15% of spouses or partners receive any paid time off following the birth of their child. So given all of that, Councilmember Rayburn, can you talk a little bit about, until Congress does act with a proposal that can provide this kind of workplace leave policies, how are workers coping with the current policies?
Well, those employees that are fortunate enough to work at a company that wants to offer generous benefits, they're probably doing okay. The rest of the employees are making impossible choices. They're showing up at work sick, they're infecting their coworkers and their customers, they're sending their children to work sick, they are leaving their family members alone and unattended when they would like to be with them, and they're not coping well.
Can you talk about the process that you went through in your community as you drafted the legislation and how it took into account the needs of your constituents, just what the process was?
We had legislation introduced at the council, and we had a public hearing with dozens of community members participating. Then we had a legislative process of nearly a year, multiple committee meetings, and then full council deliberations and action. It was a very thorough process, and then we gave up to 15 months after enactment of the law to work out the operational implementation issues. So it was very deep engagement.
I also want to just say that I'm glad that we're having this conversation. It's probably, again, next to pensions, probably one of the most important things that we need to look at. I focus a lot on the future of work, and particularly we talked about people who are middle income and lower income and just all of the changes that are going to be happening. When I look at the future of work, because of that, that's one of the concerns that I have about not having baselines. And I also lived in China, so I know when you don't have baselines, even for things like OSHA, it impacts us. There are best practices out there, and as a matter of fact, we know that there are some great programs out there. So I just want to thank you, and I yield back.
Recognize initially now my friend from Marianas.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I ask unanimous consent to permit Representative Rosa DeLauro to be recognized and participate in today's hearing.
Without objection, the gentlelady who does not serve on the committee but has legislation dealing with our concerns is allowed to sit on the committee and will be allowed to ask questions at the end of questioning.
Thank you very much.
Now I recognize the gentlelady from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. And to the witnesses today, I apologize for missing your oral testimony, but I did have an opportunity to read through the written testimony yesterday. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. I wanted to start with Ms. Lucas, if I might, given the exchange that we just had about the percentage of companies that are or are not offering these types of benefits. It strikes me that just because something is not mandated, it does not mean that a company is not willing to or already voluntarily offering a lot of these different paid sick and paid family leave. I was wondering, given that we have a scenario in the European Union where this type of thing is mandated here in the United States, what do you see as the impact, potential negative effect on workers in this country if we were to do a blanket mandate of this nature, and especially on working women?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I do think that we've got such an exciting time for women and having so many workplace opportunities. We're encouraging women to lean in, and I do think that we hear a lot about the benefits of what happens in Europe. With obviously there's something wonderful about taking months off after the birth of a child, but there are some negative aspects of it that I think are often overlooked. And that includes that there's a lot of women who do feel pigeonholed. Not everybody wants to take off 6 months after work to spend that much much time at home with their newborn, but these expectations for women certainly do create kind of a lean out mentality. And then there are many fewer women in Europe who are serving in leadership positions. Their labor force participation rate is relatively high, but a lot of that is part-time work or lower paid work. So there are real consequences to this. And I would say that also, I think that it's important to recognize that, that not everybody is a mom. And especially, there's not a lot of folks who aren't parents who don't want this, and of course they may have other aspects, but we all know that there is something to, we need to be respectful of this idea of what happens when somebody takes off work, that somebody else has to pick up that work. And there are some full-time workers who end up resenting the extra burdens that they face when these generous, especially in Europe, these generous leave packages.
Okay, thank you. Moving to Ms. Schaefer, in your testimony you noted some research that millennials in particular value flexibility over compensation, with 35% of millennials being willing to take a 10 to 20% pay cut in exchange for flexibility and these broader leave policies. Have you personally seen this trend throughout your 20 years of experience, and can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, thank you for your question. I have, and currently at Safety National, 27% of our workforce falls into the category of millennials, and that's exactly what they're asking for, is that flexibility. And because we are listening and working with them, we're able to meet the needs of the business as well as the needs of the employees.
Okay, great. So it strikes me that what we need to be focused on is ensuring that we have a robust free market flexibility approach to all of this. My second question, also for you, Ms. Schaefer, as we discuss paid leave today, I have heard it referred to, frankly, as both a policy and a benefit. So how would you see it? Is it a benefit? Do most people come into the workforce assuming that there's some sort of benefit in that area, or do they see it more as a policy, or is it part of their package, if you will?
Right. In my experience, it's a benefit, very much so.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you so much.
I thank the gentlelady, and now I recognize my friend from Oregon, Ms. Bonamici.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize for leaving. I have a Science Committee at the same time. So thank you for holding this hearing. Thank you to our witnesses all for being here. You know, it's pretty clear that our workplace policies have not really kept pace with the changing workforce, and I think we all agree with that. Everyone who's here today testifying and all the members recognize that in different ways. And because we know that paid leave is good for families and businesses, policymakers will continue to address this issue. I thank you, Mr. Rayburn, for explaining that from your perspective. My state of Oregon has been a national leader in passing legislation to provide workers with paid sick days and predictable schedules. And Oregonians have been able to earn and use job-protected sick time to care for themselves or for a family member for nearly 2 years. Our paid sick day law allows workers to earn 40 hours of sick time a year that can be used for their own immediate family member or for preventive care. The law also allows paid sick time to be used for domestic violence survivors to obtain services, a really important aspect there, and almost 500,000 workers benefit from this law, and that makes Oregon a better place for families to live and work. And importantly, these policies, as Mr. Rayburn explained, help businesses recruit and retain good, loyal employees, and that decreases turnover and costs associated with hiring and retraining. Simply put, a healthy, happy workforce is good for business. And Susan is a woman in Portland who experienced great hardship before the law passed, taking care of herself in an illness. She had worked in a grocery store for 15 years, and she did not have sick time until the third day of an illness, and only then with a note from her doctor. She explained that she had to go to work sick all the time because she couldn't afford to take unpaid days, even to go to the doctor. When she absolutely had to stay home, she had to decide which bill she could pay. She's a mother who also needed sick time to be home with her kids when they were sick. In fact, her employer of 15 years wrote her up for taking too many unpaid sick days, and she was terrified about losing her job. So these are the harsh realities of life without paid or protected sick time for low-wage workers, especially around the country. So we've heard from members on the other side of the aisle about H.R. 4219, which does not solve the problem because we know, because that's voluntary, we know that states and local jurisdictions will continue to address their needs of their constituents, like Susan, and that's what Oregon did. Unfortunately, this 4219 will eliminate and undermine sick leave policies for workers in Oregon and around the country who are lucky enough to live in a state or a jurisdiction that has implemented paid sick time, and it will stifle innovation in state legislatures and local governments until, and the reason states and local governments are acting is because the federal government has not. So if we really want to help workers and families, we should be talking about the Healthy Families Act, which I know our colleague, Congresswoman DeLauro, will talk about, and also the Family Act for paid family leave. That's what we should be discussing today, and until we set that federal standard, state and local governments need to be able to act. So I know, President Raymer, you talked about your law being in place since October of 2016, and can you talk a little bit about how your businesses have responded? How has the community affected? How is the community affected? And what are some of the? Have you seen negative effects? And what are some of the positive effects?
Thank you, Congressman. Really enjoyed your comment there. We think our law has been a big success. We are not hearing from employers that it has been an undue burden for them to make the minor adjustments in their payroll systems that it takes to track. And we certainly are hearing from employees that they appreciate the rights that have been granted to them by our local government's law. And we know that we had to work closely with our major employers to help establish that nothing that we did in our law would, require them to change their policy. And that was important to us because we really appreciate our large employers, and we want them to thrive and prosper in our community. And if they're offering better than the requirement, we don't want to disrupt that. So
thank you. And when I'm in Oregon, I participated several years in a wonderful event called When Work Works, and we have many small businesses come forward because oftentimes you hear that these policies are a burden on small businesses, and they talk about how it actually helps them. With recruitment, with retention. And Mr. Chairman, before I close, I want to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from Patagonia's Vice President of Human Resources and Shared Services. The letter explains the outdoor retailers' investments in their employees and how they have seen it help both their employees and their bottom line.
Hearing no objection, they'll be entered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Lady, and now I recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you very much, Chairman Tim Wahlberg, for your leadership, and your service means so much to the people of Michigan and South Carolina and all of the United States. Thank you. Ms. Schaefer, how have workplace leave policies changed over the last 10 years? Do you think the economy over the last 8 years has affected the employer's ability to provide leave policies and flexibility to employees?
Yes, I do think the economy has had an impact. I can only speak from my experience with my current employer, and that it is a business decision when it comes to the leave offerings that we're able to make.
And with a growing economy, as we're seeing, and can anticipate, particularly with the tax cuts that will enable businesses to create jobs, that should have a very positive impact.
I'm not able to speak to that specifically.
Well, I see it in the state I represented, and it's just to see the consumer confidence at record levels, to see as I have actually had the opportunity to have a discussion with President Trump about the increase in the stock market from the day that he was elected to where we are today, 5,000 points, 23%. I'm just so enthusiastic for the growth of our economy and job opportunities for the American people. Ms. Lucas, can you talk about the trade-offs that come with government mandates? How do these mandates impact job opportunities and overall employee compensation?
Yes, I think that everybody knows who's had a budget. When you look at the cost of somebody that you're hiring, you have to look not just only at the dollars that they're going to get in their take-home pay, but you have to look at how much you have to spend in taxes, payroll taxes, and benefits. And so as we increase benefits, that's an additional cost that employers have to factor in. It means lower compensation or fewer jobs that you're going to be able to offer. When we have at my small organization, when somebody goes off for leave for 6 weeks, I can't just push that off onto somebody, the responsibilities off to somebody else, but I have to hire another person, and that's money that I won't have to give other raises or for other uses. So there's a real economic trade-off with that. And it doesn't mean benefits are a mistake, but you do have to factor them in when you are doing a budget, especially if you're a small organization.
And thank you very much for your presidency of the Independent Women's Forum, making a difference
Thank you.
On behalf of the people of our country. Ms. Brickmeyer, some have suggested that businesses that are large enough to operate in multiple jurisdictions readily have the capacity to establish different business processes according to their jurisdictions. You've noted that IBM spends a great deal of time complying with ever-changing state and local mandates. Do you agree with the statement that if a business is large enough to operate in more than one state or locality, they should accept this patchwork of paid leave mandates as a result? Why not?
Well, no, I don't accept that. As a premise, we might have to accept it if the mandates are there, and they certainly are there now. But what we're really advocating for is, just like we have in healthcare, with ERISA preemption, which has worked remarkably well since the 1970s, since it's been enacted. We're advocating for something very similar to that, where local mandates would apply, unless a company opts into a national standard.
Thank you very much. And in your testimony, you note that IBM provides a generous paid leave policy that includes a minimum of 15 days paid vacation, up to 26 weeks of full or partially paid short-term disability, 12 weeks of paid child bonding leave for new parents in addition to paid sick leave. Does IBM provide this leave to keep up with any state or particular state or local mandate? And how is this mandate administered across the country?
So all of the things that you referenced were independent of any mandates, right? We've had these policies for many, many years. They're developed based on our workforce and our industry. And as I said, we just added the 12 weeks parental leave, and that was purely on our own volition, based on the needs of our workforce and wanting to keep parents in the workforce once they take time off with their kids. But as we think about expanding that, our employees have asked for different types of paid leave, which we're considering. But we actually might have to consider something different, maybe say no, or think about different designs, because we have to figure out how they fit in with certain mandates. And particularly in New York State, which we have a lot of people in, and it was mentioned that there's a mandate coming in January 1. And as was also stated, we only have so much budget, so many compensation dollars to manage our workforce and to be able to meet our business commitments. And so there have to be trade-offs.
Thank you all for being here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your leadership.
I thank the General for your kind words. I got to figure out what I owe you.
Just do a good job. That's it.
I now recognize my friend and a proud Harley rider from New Jersey, Mr. Norcross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for putting this committee hearing together, focusing on something that every one of us experience, sick time, family time, and just to have a discussion on today's environment and how tough it is to balance what we do every day. I was a single dad. It was tough. I had help from my parents that was able to do it, but it's trying to make things work. So for each of you coming and sharing your experience, we appreciate it. Obviously, there's a huge difference. Those large corporations like IBM, who have a very generous policy, an $80 billion a year company has resources to do these. But we also understand that the businesses have to take into account both sides of the equation. And that's one of the things I'm trying to look at when we start looking at the 4219. We're all talking about helping those workers successfully raise a family and manage life, yet it becomes voluntary. 37 million workers today have no sick time. 13% of private industry, you cannot earn sick time. So if we're trying to create a foundation and that employers will do the right thing, I'm confused on how you try to put these numbers together. If employers are going to do the right thing and balance, why only 13% make this available? And that's the tough part that we're trying to reconcile here. Ms. Lucas, you said that you don't think, or I'm paraphrasing, for workers, it's a good idea for them to have these benefits. They'd rather have an extra $10 in their pocket. I think they'd rather have both, quite frankly, but we understand that balance.
In an ideal world, certainly.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
Show me where that world is. I think we'll all
Yeah,
move there.
Of course.
One of the trends that has been happening, particularly in healthcare, is paid time off, which in concept doesn't go into why you're taking the day off. You're just out. So when we're looking at these, Ms. Schaefer, how do you balance PTO versus sick time and family leave, particularly with regards to the tax credit piece that we're looking here?
So the paid time off, as you noted, can be used for any reason. And so if an employee is in fact sick or needs to take care of a sick child, they don't have to report that to us. They're just saying that they need to take time off.
So how are you going to address that to get a tax credit? You're now going to have to set in a new policy and mandates to say, if you're taking a sick day off, we need to verify that versus a vacation day or mental health day. How are you going to do that?
The employees would be able to take the time. We wouldn't be requiring them.
So then you can't get the tax credit. You would forego the tax credit rather than ask that question?
I would have to have Sherm follow up with you on that.
Okay. How would IBM handle this? Do you have PTO?
I know what you're referring to, and we've been looking at that as well. And it's absolutely correct. Right now, we don't ask any questions. For incidental sick time, paid time off, vacation, it's yours. You can take it as you wish. And I think it's very intrusive to have to ask these questions. These are very personal questions. But you're absolutely right. If there were a tax credit for certain days off, we would then have to add another compliance burden to ourselves and ask very difficult questions of our employees. But that's correct.
I would assume you expect if you're going to get a tax credit, which means taxpayers' money, they have a right to understand what this is being used for.
I understand that, yes.
So, Ms. Lucas, do you have any thoughts on this? This creates another mandate if you want the tax credit.
Sorry, I think there is a concern. I do think that we need to try to allow businesses and employees to work out the different benefit packages that make sense for them. And I worry about creating some favored pools of leave over others. I prefer it to be more broad.
If that's going on and employers want to do the right thing, how do you explain only 13%?
Well, I think you're 13%. I think that it's hard to, it's often, there's a lot of different statistics out there. And I like looking at the Census Bureau to see how they report their experiences with employers. Because a lot of employers have one bucket of leave that they can use for something like family leave.
That's what we were talking about, right? The different pockets.
And it does show that the.
Oh, let's say 25%. That means 75% aren't doing it.
No, I think but I think when it comes to full-time workers, that it's well over 50% of first-time moms report having some paid time off from work.
Some paid time off.
Yeah, I mean,
so if they gave them an hour, that would qualify.
Sure, and I do think, when I heard the story of the.
We're out of time. I'm sorry, so I appreciate testimony. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I recognize the gentlelady from New Hampshire, Ms. Shea Porter.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the hearing record a statement from the National Treasury Employers Union in support of paid parental leave legislation for federal workers, and I add my voice in support of this and other legislation to establish robust and common sense paid leave policies for all workers, public and private sector.
Hearing no objection, it'll be entered.
Thank you. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics said, as Mr. Norcross also said, 32% of private sector's employees cannot earn a single day. 32%. So as we're talking about all this, we know that 1 in 3 Americans cannot earn a single day. This is particularly important to me right now because my daughter had a preemie baby, and because of her good company and because of her husband's good company, they were able to be at the hospital and be there together, and what a difference that made. And so as I think about all those people that we're talking about, 1/3 of Americans can't have a single day off. This is what we should be focused on, and yet I have not heard the panel express, for the most part, the recognition that we're not doing right by the workers of this country. And I hope that we'll hear more advocacy about this. So I would like to ask each one of you to just say yes or no, please, about the Healthy Families Act, H.R. 1516. Representative Rosa DeLauro is sitting here. And thank you for this bill. This bill requires employers who employ at least 15 employees to provide employees with up to 7 paid sick days, which can also be used to take time off to address domestic violence. Employees would earn 1 hour of paid sick time for every 30 hours. So they would just get 1 hour of sick time, up to 7 paid sick days. Do you support that, and does your organization support that?
SHRM does not support that.
Thank you. How about you, Ms. Brickmeyer?
I would have to say we have no opinion on the bill at this time.
That's interesting, and
Strongly support that. Thank you.
you.
No, we do not support that.
Okay, so when we're talking about all of these people who don't have coverage, 3 out of 4 of you said that you don't support just 7 sick paid days. May I ask each one of you if you have 7 sick paid days or more? Please, yes or no?
We don't have sick time. We had a general paid time off bank.
But more than 7 days?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Isn't that wonderful? I'm so glad that you do. And you know what? Everybody sitting here has time off too. Isn't that great? How are we leaving 1/3 of American workers and their families behind? So I ask each one of you there sitting to think about what you just said, that you have it, and yet you're comfortable sitting here saying, no, we don't support that. Ms. Brickmeyer, I was impressed by your testimony because you were talking about how difficult it is for IBM to comply with all of these regulations right now. And I'm going to quote, "An overwhelming challenge has resulted from the burden created by myriad inconsistencies in the various state and local laws, the speed at which new laws and amendments arise, and the sheer number and range of requirements applicable to IBM's operations around the country." And of course, IBM is a massive company that's able to do work around the world, so I'm sorry it seems like such a burden. But here's the thing that I find interesting. Let me be very specific. This is you again. In the area of paid sick leave, by my last count, there were 6 states, that's 6 out of 50, 2 counties, and roughly 29 local ordinances covering paid sick leave. Is that really that overwhelming for IBM, a big company, to work with just 6 states, 2 counties, and roughly 29 local ordinances that cover paid sick leave? Is that really a problem?
Well, it did take us 9 months to figure out, and the executive order as well, to figure out the jurisdictions, who was eligible, what the rules were, and then compare and contrast them.
Okay.
So it's not just what you said, it's all the combination and permutations.
All right, thank you, but it still seems amazing to me. And Ms. Lucas, you said 99% of businesses with more than 50 workers offer some form of paid time off. Are you aware, and this is Treasury Department, that 96% of employers have fewer than 50 workers?
Yeah, absolutely, and those workers and those companies have a very different situation and costs that they have to consider and make budgets.
Right, so we're still leaving more workers behind. The suggestion by the numbers sounds like they're covered, but we're leaving them behind. And my final point, because we're running out of time here, is that you said we should enable workers to save tax-free for time off, right? Mm-hmm. Do you know that what the minimum wage is in this country?
Yes, but that doesn't, I mean...
So how, if you're supporting that, because I know a lot of people in my district, in my community, who work 2 jobs just to feed their children and get a little roof over their heads, they don't have any money to save to put into the tax-free account for time off. So do you still think that's a solution?
I think it's the start of a solution. It's very hard to find jobs for and to find a way to get low-income workers, the minimum wage workers, paid time off without displacing them from their jobs, because I worry very much about them losing their jobs, not just about the benefits that they have as a part of
Let's say that they're
those jobs.
fortunate enough to earn $10 an hour. Okay, it's $400 a week, and that's $1,600 a month, and they have to pay taxes out of that. $1,600 a month. Rent where I am is about $1,000. You have a couple of kids, that's it. So even though that sounds good, I'm just imploring you to look at that again and recognize that that is not real. That is not possible.
Thank the gentlelady.
Thank you
Time
very
has
much.
expired.
I yield back. Thank you.
And I'm pleased to offer opportunity for 5 minutes of questioning to the gentlelady from the Appropriations Committee who comes over to our subcommittee. We're glad to have you today. Welcome for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for allowing me to participate in this hearing today. I just want to make a very, very quick point. You all have talked about the number of sick days that you have. Let me just tell you that the United States Congress, we have an infinite amount of sick days. We can get sick for several weeks. Our kids can get sick for several weeks. Our parents can get sick for several weeks. I know this personally. My mom passed away this summer. I spent 6 weeks with her. My pay was not docked. I did not lose my job. When I was sick with ovarian cancer and had to leave for 2.5 months as a staff member to a United States senator, my job was there. He said, go get well. It will be there. That should not be just the prerogative of all of you with your 7 days, or probably more, or members of the United States Congress to have that kind of an effort. Let me just try to correct the record, if I can, in 2 or 3 points, and then ask a question. And Ms. Lucas, your IWF research says here, universal paid leave will force businesses to provide paid family and medical leave benefits. This is not what the Family Act does. It creates a fund with shared contributions. It is social insurance. Employers, employees pay in. Your Family Act, Healthy Families Act, is not a mandate. There is nothing that prevents employers from offering more generous benefits above the baseline. As my colleague pointed out, this is National Partnership for Women and Families, estimated 37 million private sector workers cannot earn a single paid sick day, does nothing to be able to help them. And I also read all of the testimonies. I'm sorry I wasn't here for that, but I read all of them. And I just want to make a couple of things in correcting the record, Ms. Lucas. And I think, and I say this, I think some of you're right, there are various statistics, but I think some of these statistics were cherry-picked. But let me talk about actual numbers that came from the same study that you quoted. Only 39% of employers with 50 or more employees allow employees at least 5 days to care for a mildly ill child. Only 6% of the total population of employers with 50 or more employees offer full pay during maternity leave. 39% offer partial pay. 11% say it depends on the situation. 42% offer no pay at all. 15% of spouse partners receive any time, they don't receive any time paid time off following the birth of their child. Less than half the workforce, 47% allow all or most employees to take time off during the workday to attend an important family or personal needs without the loss of pay. Full 25% of companies do not comply with FMLA requirements for unpaid leave. This is DOL research. Just one more. This is outrageous that we do not understand the lives that families are leading today. And I will ask a question of Ms. Brickmeyer, I apologize, with regard to IBM. You have a generous package. You do have a generous package. I applaud you for all of that. Why then? You exceed these baselines. Why wouldn't you not embrace National Paid Sick Days Law or a National Paid Family and Medical Leave fund. In essence, what this piece of legislation does, if you take a hard look at it, it is voluntary. There is minimum amount of compensation. Employers decide whether or not the employee can go. There are 6 arrangements. If you don't fit into this little box, then you're on your own. There is no compliance with state and local affairs, and there may or may not be overtime pay. It's ludicrous what's been described as overtime pay. Why, Ms. Brickmeyer, would you not embrace national paid sick days? As my colleague from New Hampshire pointed out, we're looking at several states, some localities. The structure of these is all the same. All the same. It is not the kind of patchwork that some would like to say it is. My view, it would allow people to walk around state and local laws that we have today, and maybe that's what people want.
Time has expired, but briefly respond to that.
Ms. Brickmeyer, thank you very much.
Okay. So I can't comment specifically on the bill that you're representing, but I would take issue with the fact that the local, state mandates are the same, because they're not. And as I said, what I'm really here to advocate for is a federal preemption for those companies who are multi-jurisdiction, who decide to opt out and have something at the federal level for all of their employees, as opposed to having to comply with a patchwork of bills that or mandates that could be very significantly different and are amended.
A national policy would not be a patchwork.
Thank you for the question and the response. The time has expired. And before I offer the ranking member closing comments, I have a letter in support of H.R. 4219 from the Progressive Policy Institute that I ask unanimous consent to insert in the record without objection. Hearing none, the letter is inserted. Mr. Sablon, for your closing comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I would really like to thank the witnesses for taking time to discuss this important subject with us today. I'm reminded of 2 things, if I may. One, the district I represent, the law, the law of the government, minimum wage is at $3.05 an hour today. And the federal government, Congress stepped in and raised the minimum wage in incremental steps. And next year it would be at $7.25 an hour. But the government, the law there still is at $3.05. There's absolutely, it shows absolutely no desire to increase it. And they paid a very famous lobbyist millions and millions of dollars to fight the federal government from implementing increasing minimum wage for workers. Another thing I would like to is I remember my dad who worked, and when he retired, he had over 2,000 hours of sick leave, and he gets, I think, 13 hours a year. 13 days a year, and he had over a year of sick leave because he doesn't get sick, and so he doesn't call off. But anyway, workers don't need another false promise. They should not have to choose between caring for themselves or a loved one and earning a paycheck. We have heard today about innovative solutions to this issue that's being developed at the state and local level. But Congress must act to guarantee minimum workplace protections for all working people while not preempting state and local government. Mr. Chair, I would like to submit to the record 3 letters, one from over 100 groups opposing H.R. 4219, the Workflex in the 21st Century Act, another letter urging Congress to pass the Healthy Families Act, and the 3rd letter is from momsrising.org.
Without objection and hearing none, they will be entered.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I urge this committee to take up the policies that are based on the successes at the state and local level, like the Healthy Families Act, the Schedules That Work Act, and the Family Act, solutions that would actually help workers and their families succeed. And if I may, I'm actually a little happy, pleased that we may actually have an ally in the White House that is supporting some kind of forward movement on family leave. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding today's hearing, and thank you very much for being here today.
Well, I thank the gentleman, and you're absolutely right, and I think that's why these hearings are taking place. And Mr. Lorio, delighted to have you here today. If you could just get some passion about your legislation, it would go a long way. I want to thank the witnesses for being here too. You've taken your time, you've prepared. It's no easy answer, but hey, that's the best way to live in America. No easy answers. We've got the choices and opportunities that go on. And this is just another of our hearings, and I think it is because we have questions in this area and we have needs. Questions such as, can employers be trusted to make good paid time off decisions for both themselves and their employees? Or can we develop productive paid time off legislation that fosters good relations between employees and employers while not violating our constitutional federalism in regards to the state and local primacy? And that is an important question to consider. While no one local or state paid time off policy may be a backbreaker for a national or global business, we certainly ought to at least consider how we can keep from unnecessary encumbrance, takeaway options, and creativity and sensitivity to the flexibility of needs of human beings that are different and their situations that are different. In the end, the robust competition today that we see, I certainly see in my 7th District of Michigan, competition for qualified employees is probably the strongest motivator for employers to put paid time off policies as well as many other policies in play in order to compete for employees in this workforce. And so it's good that we are now having these discussions in the marketplace, in the House, in the Senate, in the White House, as has been mentioned truthfully, and both sides of the aisle. And I want to commit myself to continue this toward the best solution that we can find that meets the needs of growing economy, growing options for employees and employers, growing as best care as we can give in our ever-developing process in the marketplace, and certainly something that we wrestle with, rightly so, on the Education and Workforce Committee, because they go hand in hand, and we want to produce growth. So thank you for attention to this hearing today. We will look forward to the future, and with no other testimony or issues before the subcommittee at this time, it stands adjourned.